Hey peeps. Hello, hello. Long time no see. Welcome back to Kaiju Deep Dive. I'm waiting a minute to make sure that people can tune in before I start blabbing for the next 30 minutes or so. 30 to 45 minutes. I've tried to give myself a little bit of leeway because you know me, I can talk for an eternity. It's all in good fun though, right? That's what I always try to say. So, for this session, we'll be talking about kaiju fanfiction, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So, just making sure that the stream is working. Maddie is here. Hello, Maddie. Igni is here. Ellen is here. We got some people tuning in. So, in my prior stream, I talked a little bit about where my obsession with kaiju fanfiction originated from. All right, so it came from when I was a kid because I honestly wanted to create new stories. And the truth is, I didn't solidify that desire to write fan fiction until, I don't know, about middle school or so. The thing that truthfully got me into writing kaiju fan fiction was reading the work by other people. All right. So I'm going to do a screen share and show you one of the stories that really intrigued me when I was first starting out. There is a website called Kaiju File. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It might sound familiar, but essentially, this was one of the first original gigantic sites that I participated in, and it was very much fan oriented. I don't even know, does it still update? Let me check this new. Nope. See, yeah, that's been a while ago since that updated. So it's kind of slowed down over the years, but it's like all of its stuff is still open and up. I used to participate on the site so much that I eventually became a moderator on the message board because, well, I have nothing else better to do with my time. But what I used to do is I would go into the fan nest right here. If you click on the button fan nest, it has an area for fan fiction, fan art, polls, so on and so forth. I would always click on fan fiction. And the stories that I used to read them by C.L. Werner. All right. Wonderful stories. There are other really wonderful writers on here, like Christine Grahame. I love Christine. Her and I are very good friends. I've read many of her stories. I feel like my friend Cindy, her story should be featured on here, but it is not. David McAvoy, another good friend of mine. I've read his work, wonderful work. And in a minute here, I'm going to show you, like, when I show you, like, the process of writing kaiju fan fiction, you'll understand why I pointed this out. But one of my favorite stories that I really was obsessed with when I was a teenager was Kamajutsu, The Coming of Bagan. Or Bagan, however, Bagan pronounced, I don't care how it's pronounced. People pronounce it in like 10 different ways. So like, look at how big the story is. It has so many different chapters. It's very, very expansive. It's very dark too. Like, this one probably should have a disclaimer on it for gore. If it were on my site, I would have a disclaimer on it for gore because it needs it. Let's see. Just looking at the comments really quickly. Maddie, you used to visit the site regularly. Yes. Igni, watch out for viruses on there. Oh, this is because my browser says not secure. Godzilla Kiru, hello, it's good to see you. Yeah, like, Ellen, the kaiju file community was really big at one point, but then, like, when social media started happening, it just died off so quickly. The only remaining hugely thriving community, I would say, is Toho Kingdom, and then, of course, we'd say that Kaiju Galaxy is also thriving too. But that is one of the sites that I used to go to that I really loved. I really enjoyed reading those stories, and the truth is, when I read those stories, I always told myself, "Holy crap, Donny, like, this person crafted together a brilliant story. Why don't you try to do that for yourself, but have it be much more advanced than your drawn comic book style stories. So that's when I started writing more substantial pieces. And of course, then that snowball effect happened. I ended up wanting to do a career in writing. I got a degree in it. Now I teach it. It's how life seems to happen. And for me, all thanks to Godzilla fan fiction. So, so I'm just going to get rid of that link up there before I get confused, because it doesn't take much to confuse me. So, um, to kind of give you some context on writing kaiju fan fiction, I whipped together a little presentation, just a little PowerPoint that will hopefully clarify things. Hopefully you can see this. I'm going to wait a second to make sure that you can see this. I have the chat box brought up. I've never tried sharing a PowerPoint on StreamYard before, so hopefully this works. I need me another tea. Actually, it's 7 p.m. I might upgrade to wine after this. It's wine o'clock. Anyway, okay, it looks like it is working. Okay, good. So, kaiju fan fiction writing. So, if you are completely new to fan fiction and you have never even been confronted by this term, which I've had happen before, like when I've told colleagues, for example, that that's how I started my own writing career and my own teaching career, I've had many people be like, what is fan fiction? Well, to put it simply, essentially a person who writes fan fiction creates a story based in an already existing universe established by a film, a TV show, a comic book series, or a book franchise, or even a video game franchise. I forgot to include that in there. But essentially, the goal of fan fiction is to create different scenarios with the characters that have already been established and based on the stories that have already been established. Now, that's not to say that new stories can't happen. Um, they can, but usually they are based on characters that already exist. Okay. So when I write kaiju fan fiction, I usually utilize Godzilla, Mothra, Ghidorah, Rodan, other characters like that. I've tinkered around with maybe doing something in the Ultraman verse at some point. I've tried thinking about ways to include Ultraman into my own series. We'll see if that happens. If it does, yay for that. If it doesn't, oh well. I love Ultraman a lot, and I would very much like to have those characters, notably from Ultraman Nexus, because that's my favorite Ultra series. I would like that to kind of cross paths with Mothra and my human characters, so on and so forth. So, but essentially, that is what fan fiction is. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of negative stereotypes about fan fiction. A lot of people assume that fan fiction consists of only like sexual, angsty love pairings between characters. And personally, I don't have anything against stories like that, because I've read some really good stories like that. I've written some stories like that before in the past. But that's not all what fan fiction is about. Like, I believe that fan fiction, no matter what the topic area, can be very expansive, can be descriptive, and ultimately, can draw the reader in. All right. Because we all know that there is definitely good fan fiction out there, and there's some not so good fan fiction out there. If you read a piece of fan fiction and it doesn't draw you in, it could likely be something in the writing that's not allowing it to draw you in. Maybe the characters are two dimensional. Maybe the monsters only show up, briefly in it. Who knows? So now, when it comes to kaiju fan fiction, notably, this kind of goes off from what I was just talking about, though. Um, Essentially, writers creating kaiju fan fiction create the stories to add to already existing stories within the following franchises. So usually Godzilla, Gamer, Ultraman, Kamen Rider, Kong, many others. There are many others that I didn't even list, but those are like the top ones, I would say. I personally usually label Mothra as being separate, considering she has her own film series as well. Okay. Now, when it comes to fan fiction, um, it doesn't have to be any specific length. They can be varying lengths. You can have a fan fiction that's a single shot story that might be a page long, 100 pages long, or you could have a long running series that spans multiple stories that that creates almost its own universe built on the one that's already existing. That's what I've done with my own stories. I might do a short single shot story from time to time, but as a writer, that's a decision that you have to make. Okay. So, let's see. Pacific Rim. Oh, I forgot to mention Pacific Rim. My bad. Ellen, did I say Kanban writer? It's possible. You know me, I get a little tongue tied from time to time. It's because I don't have any wine in my system. That's my excuse. I sound like I drink constantly. I swear, my friends, I do not. In fact, when I'm writing, I usually drink a little bit of tea. So now, before we get into the intricacies of like the process behind my recommended process for writing kaiju fan fiction, I do want to preface this by saying, if you don't think of yourself as a writer, if you can't place yourself in that mindset of identifying yourself as a writer, then it's going to be very difficult writing a piece of kaiju fan fiction. All right. Many of us, if we've never done an art form, we don't really think of ourselves as being one who uses such an art form. Like, if I want to draw something, I don't consider myself an artist already because I'm not that good at it, or I just label myself inexperienced. I need to practice what I preach because I don't think that's the right mindset for me to have. I should identify myself as an artist because that's going to motivate me to want to work more and improve. The same goes with writing fiction, writing poetry. If you identify yourself as a writer, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to motivate yourself and to accomplish some meaningful work. Now, you have to give yourself permission for the first drafts of the things that you write to be not good. Your first draft is not going to be good. Believe me, I've written so many first drafts that have been like dumpster fires, all right? But you have to allow them to be that way, all right? Because in discovering that, that's when you're going to start growing. Okay. You might want to ask a friend for some feedback. If you go to Kaiju Galaxy, the site that I'm always referencing, the site that this whole channel is based on, if you post your stories there and ask for feedback, we would be more than happy to provide some feedback for you. Let me monitor the chat box first. Igni, I would love to be a proofreader for the snippet that you want to submit. Yeah. Ooh, Maddie. So toward the end of this stream, I'm going to talk a little bit about when aliens attack, but I'm glad that you mentioned that because I almost forgot. So that's a scale on or a story on a much grander scale that's going to be super fun to talk about. And, something that I fondly remember very, very well. So that's kind of like my little soapbox about like identifying yourself as a writer before writing something, because it's going to empower you to write. Because I've seen so many people who've not done that, and they just sit and they stare at a blank document, and then they don't end up writing, or worse yet, they don't even end up finishing what they write because they just adopt the belief that it's already not good enough. And it's sad when that happens. I've had that happen to me before. And to this day, there are many stories that I really regret not writing because I didn't have the confidence. So take this moment as me imbuing you with the confidence, hopefully, to start writing something. All right. Now, Godzilla Kira has to leave for a while, or may watch the rest later. Thank you for tuning in for a while. I appreciate it. As graceful as you are stubborn. That's the title of Igni's snippet. Beautiful title. I love it, actually. It's suspenseful. I'm really looking forward to it. All right, so let's move forward. I've already eaten up 15 minutes of the stream, like being on a soapbox about philosophical aspects of being a writer. Now, walking you through these steps. Now, you may come across another fan fiction writer who might have a different set of steps than I do, and that's completely okay. This is what works best for me. So if you are a writer yourself and you have a different process, that's fine. But if you are starting out and you really don't have any template or basis when it comes to writing fan fiction, I'm hoping this might be helpful for you. All right. So step number one, when it comes to writing your own fan fiction story, read stories by other fan fiction writers that you admire. For me, my immediate go-tos are my friend Christine Grahame. I immediately go to C.L. Werner. I read my friend Cindy's fanfics. I love, love, love all of those writers. There are many other writers that I could talk about too, but those are my top ones. Now, there is a specific reason why I go to those writers, because in my own stories, I love to depict the kaiju as being characters that develop gradually. They end up having very humanistic qualities in the sense that they are perceptive, intelligent, they are capable of communication, they have motivations. And in those stories, those writers give me examples of how they do that, which thus in turn inspires me to apply those same strategies in my own stories, okay, except in my own way. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So honestly, the best way is reading stories of other fan fiction writers. Reading is the best way to help us familiarize ourselves with something. I tell this to my own students when it comes to writing poetry. If you want to help yourself grow as a poet, expose yourself to more poetry, because you'll get more ideas, you'll see other strategies, and you'll be enlightened slash inspired in a bunch of different ways that way. So P.S. If anybody has any strategies of their own that they want to share in the chat, feel free to chime in. Oh, good, 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 good. I'm going to mention toward the end, Ellen, those creative weeks. So if I'm like at the last 5 minutes and if I've not said anything about that yet, send me something literally in all caps being like, Donny, what the hell are you doing? So yeah. I don't know why, but my lips are ridiculously chapped right now. Okay, so step number 2, determine what franchise you want your story to connect with. Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman, a hybrid of the two, so on and so forth. That's I mean, that's a pretty self-explanatory crucial step that will be super confusing if you don't take it. All right, because that's going to give you a little bit more of a basis. All right, now if you want to write something that's like an original kaiju that you've created, like an original character, then obviously it doesn't have to tie to any one of those franchises specifically. So if I want to create a story about I don't know, a giant pair of glasses that is somehow a cyborg and alive, well, obviously this monster wouldn't really be connected with any franchise because it's completely original, unless somehow I want to weave it into an already existing one, which you can. It's entirely up to you. Godzilla versus cyborg glasses. Sounds interesting. I know it doesn't actually, but I couldn't think of anything else as an example. So, step number 3, determine the era or particular film series associated with your own story, or determine if it is a standalone. All right. So I will give you an example. My story, my series connects essentially the Heisei era Godzilla films, so the 90s Godzilla films and the Mothra trilogy. Ever since I watched both of those different series, I've always been hella annoyed that the Heisei Godzilla films do not connect with the Mothra trilogy, considered that they're both considered Heisei. All right. So in my stories, my goal my stories pick up right off where Godzilla versus Destroya leaves us hanging, and then I start developing those characters gradually, and I weave into the Mothra trilogy, bring those characters in, so on and so forth. All right. I'll show you some of my writing notes here just to give you an idea of how I draft my notes for that. Now, after you make that determination, you might want to think a little bit further and say, like, maybe, like, instead of just thinking of the era, maybe I want my story to be associated with a specific series, like within, like, maybe a specific couple movies or a specific movie. One of my favorite, two of my favorite films are Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, the 2002 movie, and its sequel, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. I love those films. They circulate around Mechagodzilla or Kiru, Godzilla, and Mothra, and they kind of create their own universe that connects back to the original Mothra film from like the 60s and the original Godzilla film from 1954. I've I've started a story. I have not finished it. I have a story that takes place in that small window of time, and it just really depends on where you want the connection to be made. So that's something that you'll have to choose prior. My latest fixation, I've been writing a story based in the MonsterVerse. I'm doing like a one-shot take of Mothra's perspective in the MonsterVerse film Godzilla King of the Monsters that came out last year. So it's really up to you. It's really up to you. Last but not least, step 4 would be structuring some notes by asking yourself very crucial questions. Now, it's important that you identify these questions because, I mean, if you just stare at a blank page, you're not going to take yourself very far. But if you ask yourself the right questions, that's what will cause you, what will ignite the creative spark that will allow you to start writing notes. All right. So, question like, number 1, what kaiju do I want to have in my story? Do I want to have a few? Do I want to just have one? Do I want to have like a smattering of already existing ones with maybe an original character that I've created? So on and so forth. I'm making sure that keeping an eye on the chat this time. Igni, I'll answer that question in just a moment as soon as I'm done covering these questions. That's a good question, though. Second question. Do I want human characters? I've seen kaiju fans write Godzilla stories or Gamera stories completely without human characters. That's fine. I prefer to incorporate some human characters. Very rarely have I ever seen a kaiju story written with just human characters and no kaiju. I feel like that would defeat the purpose of kaiju fan fiction. I did read one story once that was just like, it was human characters reflecting on a past event. So there were like flashbacks peppered through the story, but they were very fleeting, let's just say. So I think you definitely want something that's going to bring in some, some kaiju. All right. What settings should be present in the story? Do I want it to take place in Japan? Do I want it to take place on Planet X? Do I want it to take place underground? So many different ideas you could do. In my stories, I have settings like, I have a lot of settings in the United States. I have some in Japan. I have Infant Island because it's very Mothra centered, so on and so forth. What are the conflicts I want to take place in the story? So conflict is important. Conflict is essentially what drives the story. Who is battling whom? All right. What human character is pissed off at what other human character? What human character is disgruntled by someone else? Who is in love with whom? Like if you want to incorporate a love story. If there is an alien invasion happening, what is their conflict or their relationship with humanity? So on and so forth. So like conflict is going to take you very, very far. What conflict does humanity have with the kaiju? Man versus nature, so on and so forth. Do you want to incorporate any themes like that? Those are questions you'll want to ask yourself. I have like the hiccups. I apologize. Here is another question that I probably should have put that I did not because I tend to be a little scatterbrained. What are the motivations of the characters you choose to include? What motivates the kaiju? What motivates the humans? What are the motivations of aliens? So on and so forth. In my stories, Godzilla's motivation usually is to somehow understand his existence. He is an anomaly. He is this creature that was created out of destruction and is trying to find his way in the world. Mothra's motivation in my stories is coming to terms with the fact that she was created by a civilization, and truthfully, she's just tasked with protecting and overseeing things. She has an internal conflict of like, well, what can I do to live this life more full, if that makes sense? Like, there's a lot of different things you can do. If you don't want to have them have like a huge motivation, that's completely fine. Maybe you just want Godzilla's motivation to destroy the populace. That's totally okay. It's up to you. I like to have my characters have motivations because I simply view it as a convenient tool to add more description to the story, and also in the grand scheme of like a series of stories, it helps create character development. If it's like a one-off story, it's a little bit easy to get away with not having as much character development, considering it's being contained within just one story, if that makes sense. Hope that's clear. All right. So to answer questions, Igni asks, what's your opinion on essentially making two characters or kaiju essentially one and the same? For example, Shin was also known as Bagan the Conqueror. I don't think there's any problem with that. I've combined characters together before. I usually do it with human characters, but um, there's been an instance like, I know I mentioned the story When Aliens Attack, and I'm going to talk about that here a little bit more in a few. But in that story, I genetically combined Mothra and Biollante together into a kaiju called Queen Mothra. And that, in a sense, was combining a character. I think as long as you explain it well, and as long as you provide some reasonable context as to why two characters would be combined, that's clear enough for the audience, then it's completely acceptable. My frustrate like I love some mystery as long as at some point the mystery is explained at some point, and that way there are no like plot holes left open. Okay, my nose like really itches right now. I am apologizing for that. Let's see. Maddie says, speaking of the Kiru saga, I've been developing a fanfic set in that universe for years now. One reason is because Akane is probably the one human character I connected with the most in the series. That's wonderful. So if you have like Maddie, for your example, if you have a human character that you really loved in the series and you want that character to inspire stories, let that inspire you. For me, mine was Miki Sagusa in the Heisei Godzilla films and the Elias in the Mothra trilogy. I loved those four characters, and they really shaped the groundwork for my own universe. So yeah, like Maddie, I would love to read those stories at some point. I hope that you finish them. How far are you into them? If you could answer that, I'd greatly appreciate it. Let's see. RP asks, what are your thoughts on fanfics where kaiju speak? As long as it's explained why the kaiju speak, that's totally fine. I think it's great. I See, the way I allow kaiju to speak in my own stories is because my stories circulate around characters who have psychic abilities, so they're telepathic, right? So they're able to communicate with the kaiju on a much deeper level than a non-telepath would be able to. Like, if a non-telepath were to look outside and see Mothra flapping above them squeaking, they would literally be like, "Oh, a giant moth squeaking at me." Whereas the psychic characters would be able to interpret and understand the thoughts being conveyed by Mothra. All right. So I kind of use them as a conduit for that kaiju focused dialogue to take place. There are other ways of doing it. If you talk to other writers, they may have other ways of doing it. That's entirely cool. But I use that as an explanation to explain to the audience, like, well, this is why they're talking, because I don't want people to read that dialogue from the monsters and be like, well, that's hella cheesy, right? Like, I want it to be taken seriously. So if there's an explanation elaborating on why that is, then bam, that hopefully provides clarification. RB, I hope that answers your question. That's a good question. Maddie says, I'm still brainstorming. You know, if you ever want on Kaiju Galaxy, if you want to just like post a topic and flesh out your thoughts, even if you want some like added ideas or feedback, that could happen. Like if you just post that in the fan fiction area on Kaiju Galaxy. Oh, I've already gotten done 30 minutes. Dang, time is flying. So I'll go the full 45 minutes because believe me, I have about 15 more minutes of talking in me with regard to this. So the next slide provides some things that you may want to avoid. Now, these are things that I've learned strictly on my own. All right. Number one, don't get too caught up in world building beyond your story. If you want to expand, do that later. All right. You can have some like super general ideas of the world you want to create, but if you want to like make your world even more gigantic outside of like the franchise and the series that you've selected, don't go overboard with it at the get-go, because if you make it too big, you might intimidate yourself out of writing the story because it might feel just too big to handle. That actually has happened to me. I was writing, well, like if you've read my fanfics, I have my psychic series where like I have these like huge stories. Periodically my stories would get bigger and bigger. My latest story, or the last story that I wrote, was Godzilla, or Mothra and Godzilla Future Destiny. It was like 400 and some pages. There was so many characters, so many monsters, time travel, alien invasions, evil alter egos of characters. It was just, it was so much. And it got overwhelming for me. And I mean, I've decided to rewrite my whole series now because I'm a much stronger writer than I used to be. But believe me, I'm not going to be making it as confusingly layered as it was. It's okay to have layers as long as it's not too much. Okay. Ellen says we have a writing guidance section on Kaiju Galaxy as well, and that you should consider either linking this stream or copying the PowerPoint to a topic in that area. Oh, believe me, I plan on it. Igni says I'm guilty of number one. Same. It's the intimidation factor. Like the complexity can get very frustrating. Yeah. Another one of my problems was I named my characters after my human friends and myself. So that made it a little bit more difficult because gradually I thought it was becoming more and more cheesy. So I had to kind of tone that back. And that's why I want to rewrite my series, is because I'm going to rewrite it without those personal names too. Now, number two, be mindful of plot holes. Make sure that all loose ends are tied. If actually that should be loose, not lose. I clearly spelled lose. I'm only human. Make sure that all loose ends are tied. If there is a loose end left open, make sure that it's done for a specific reason. So if you leave like something on a cliffhanger, obviously you would be leaving it on a cliffhanger because that's setting something up for a sequel. All right, which is completely okay. But like I've had situations where, like, say there was a story where I had a talisman as being a very crucial part of the plot. Halfway through the story, I forgot about it because I started the story one year, finished it off a year later, and completely forgot about it, didn't reread through it. The talisman is this weird, mysterious thing that just had no purpose. And that was a huge plot hole. So you want to make sure that you tie up all your loose ends. So if you start writing a story and then you go an extended period of time without finishing it and you pick it back up, reread it. Definitely reread it because it's going to definitely help you. See, Maddie, the difference between you and I is I was a high schooler naming characters after my classmates. It's because I was super angsty and I had to I had to siphon my angstiness out of myself through that means. No shame, no shame. Number 3 is a huge one. Don't include too many kaiju or human characters. It'll quickly get overwhelming. In my story, Mothra and Godzilla Future Destiny, I probably had 7 or 8 kaiju and probably about 20 to 25 human characters. So many. That it was just too much. So don't do that because then it'll kind of connect back to the first bullet point. It'll make you feel like it's so big that you can't wrangle with it, if that makes sense. All right. Number 4, make sure that shifts in time or flashbacks are plotted out and clarified throughout the story. I usually will use transitions in my writing, but I'll also like maybe like say like after one section in the next section, if it's a flashback, I might in italics put 1991 AD, location, Tokyo, Japan, just to kind of give an idea that, oh, like it's taking place before what was established at the beginning of the story. All right. I definitely encourage the use of timestamps. That is very, very helpful for the audience. You can create a timeline that they'll be able to more effectively visualize like the first point of the story versus other points in the story. Again, like I mentioned in my last stream, that's another scenario where you're going to probably want to separate your story into chapters or sections because it'll make it much easier for you to organize, but it'll also make it easier for your audience to understand when something is a flashback versus when something isn't a flashback. In the past, I have done flashbacks in entirely in italics. I don't always recommend that anymore because my telepathic speak now in my stories is now italicized. So, but I want people to obviously identify what normal dialogue is versus what telepathic dialogue looks like. So, Maddie says that number 3 is what you're suffering with. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we're here for you if you need any help with that. Igni says the amount of characters is kind of a lot, but this particular story is solely focused through Mothra Leo's life. The side characters will change as he advances throughout his life. So as long as like as if this is one story, then maybe like have that advancement take place throughout like specific chapters. Just make sure that it's divided up. That way the audience can plot out that progression, if that makes sense. I'm like hardcore nerding out right now because I have always wanted to do a stream like this. So this makes me super happy. So PS, once this is over, if you know anybody who might benefit from this kaiju fanfiction pep talk, feel free to share it. Like I would appreciate it. It will get this information out there and I hope it's helpful for people. Last but certainly not least, strive to avoid making an established character act out of character without any lead-in or explanation. So if I, in one of my stories, decided to turn Mothra and her innocent protector pacifist self into this cold-blooded killer who like literally like rips the throat out of her enemies with zero explanation, that probably might piss off the audience if it's out of character without any explanation. Now, if I like said, oh, like, well, Mothra turned into like some sort of cyborg incarnate because humans brought her back or something, that might be a reason for her to be like this mindless, you know, bloodlusting creature. You know, like as long as there's explanation, that's what's needed. All right. Now, the truth is, I've seen people depict kaiju or human characters that have already been established in so many different ways. But the truth is, when we write fan fiction, we are in a way honoring those characters that have been created. So I don't think we should completely derail the essence of what makes them who they are, right? I mean, if you take, for example, Mike Dougherty, the director of Godzilla King of the Monsters, Toho literally told him, you cannot have Mothra kill people. She is not a bloodthirsty killer. And she doesn't in his film, right? Maddie downloaded Streamlabs. Do it. It's good. You know, Ellen, I really thought of that too. We should have posted these streams in those Facebook groups. Igni asks, what if the bloodlust stuff is in the character's past? That's okay, as long as it's explained. I would say as long as it's explained and justified. The audience just needs to see what makes a character go from point A to point B, if that makes sense. Like that in between has to be established. Maybe I'll go through and I'll share these streams in those groups later on tonight too. So that is essentially what I have for you. All right. Now, what I want you to do on your own is I want you to try, if you've never done this, I want you to begin crafting a fanfic of your own by using the steps and do it in a Word document or a notebook, whatever is most comfortable for you. I used to handwrite all of it. Now I have to type it out because, well, handwriting, like a 100-page story, can make it a little bit challenging for me, at least. So, but it, like, at least do it in a doc or in a notebook that allows you to keep track of all of your ideas. It allows you to see them in their entirety. All right. Now, just to give you some example of what my own notes look like, just to kind of give you a template to reference. Let's see here. Let me do another share screen. Application window. All right. So here are the notes for my story, The Black Mothra, which takes place right after my story, Godzilla, A Heart Ruptured. And it is essentially the rewrite of my original story called The Return of Batra. All right. That was my first formal kaiju fanfic that I wrote way back in like 2001 or 2002. If you read it now, it's really dreadful. It's really bad. But I'm going to rewrite it as with my abilities as they are now. So what I've done, and I'll make this a little bit large for you to see, I've established settings, okay? The primary settings of my story are Infant Island, Tokyo, a place in Michigan, because I'm reintroducing the characters that were named after my friends and I, but with original names, and a specific island. I have human characters listed from most significant to least significant. Minor characters, all right, quite a few. So there's quite a few characters. So some of these characters might be mentioned, they might briefly appear in the story, but they're present because I'm kind of rebuilding my universe again so I can get an idea of who will all be included. Notice I also include titles of who these characters are. Mickey in my story, Mickey Sagusa, is the interim director of the ESP Institute. All right. Dr. Reginald Tanis is the UN Counter G Committee cybernetics engineer. These are very formal titles. They're established throughout the series. The kaiju, only 4 in this one. And then I have like specific plot points. All right. And then later I have some like conflicts. So these are the types of things that I would recommend establishing because it's going to ultimately make your writing process much easier. All right. Because believe it or not, like I'm one of those people I have written by the seat of my pants. I have literally just opened up a Word document and started. It's okay to do it that way if you prefer it like that. Okay. But um but I would still strongly recommend note taking because it'll help you keep track of your thoughts. And if there's any like major adjustments that you need to make, that means you can go back to the drawing board and do that. RP asks if you have to download Streamlabs Labs to participate tomorrow. You do not. You do not. If you go on Kaiju Galaxy, there is a link to it. And if you just want to like participate in the chat, you'll still be able to comment in the chat box too. So, well, my friends, I really appreciate you joining me, but I'm going to finish this off here. I hope that this was informative for you. I hope that this hopefully gives you some ideas of what you might want to do when it comes to writing your own pieces of kaiju fan fiction. If you ever need help, let me know. Of course, go to the Kaiju Galaxy message board if you've not joined it yet. Just click on the register button and join it, because there are writers there who can provide some assistance if you ever need that assistance. All right. Anyway, I love you all, and I will see you for our sessions tomorrow. Remember, the first session is the Kaiju Galaxy reunion. And before I forget, thank you, Ellen, for mentioning this. But Kaiju Galaxy is going to be doing creative weeks, like on the actual message board. All right. So that means that on various weeks, we're going to have like these different themes and prompts for people to do. So maybe we'll say, like, as a prompt, write a scene of a kaiju destroying a city. How are the humans reacting to the event? That might be one of them. Okay. So we're going to be doing those creative weeks. It's going to be super fun. Go to Kaiju Galaxy for more information on that. Igni asks, yeah, I'm streaming on here tomorrow. It's going to be on the YouTube channel here. I am inviting Kaiju Galaxy members who are registered on the forum, which you are, to participate live with me and have verbal conversation with me through a link that I have on there. I think the maximum I can have is like maybe 10 people, but it'll still be on Kaiju Galaxy's YouTube channel that's taking place. You would just have to go to the forum to find that link. I hope that answers your question. I apologize for the confusion. Anyway, I hope that answers everyone's questions. Thank you for joining me. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to let me know on Kaiju Galaxy, message me on Facebook, email me, whatever works best for you. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye.